here are the big 5 chronic diseases in our community.
So I'm glad you told me as 5 because I've always thought it was. I've always read it as 4. I wouldn't know. I'm only learning, but you're going to tell me it's 5. That's great. I want to hear what these are.
I'll see which one's the extra one. Yeah. So number 1, cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, and it's number 1 killer in the world.
Number 1 killer in the
world. By a long shot.
By a big margin. It's a little bit better than it was in the 80s. We have made some gains there, partially because we're just much better at doing stuff, right? Yeah. So, I do research and work with a cardiologist at the Victorian Heart Hospital. Some of the stuff they do is amazing, but it's all reactive care, It's like taking out your appendix with one port. They can now thread things into your heart and put a stent in and clip the valves in your heart, just by threading a wire in. But we're better at doing stuff, but cardiovascular disease remains the number 1 killer.
So just on that then, if we could it's number 1 killer, but in terms of us getting better at dealing with it, you're just saying more from an engineering point of view, like in that instruments are better and there's more efficiency, less cutting up, less invasion, etc.
The reactive care component is better. The procedural component is better.
Yep.
But we have an aging population as well. More and more people have these diseases, but it's silent. And what we need to do is actually get in front of it. So like cardiovascular disease is number 1, right? Number 2 is metabolic disease. Metabolic disease is a big umbrella. So some people think metabolic disease, do you mean diabetes? Diabetes is under the umbrella of metabolic disease, but it's a huge umbrella. It's actually how your body functions, how you process sugars, how your hormones work, what your body composition is, what your inflammatory processes are. That's all metabolic health. And 2 out of 3 people in Australia actually are in a state of suboptimal metabolic health. So they don't have full-blown diabetes, but there is something in terms of their function that is interfering with their with optimal metabolic function.
And will that eventually kill them?
It's likely to eventually drive another process that could put them at risk of a sudden event or of early demise. So metabolic health is the biggest contributor to things like cardiovascular disease. It's the biggest contributor, probably outside of genetics or more so than genetics, contributing to things like neurodegenerative conditions, like Alzheimer's, like Parkinson's disease. It's all systems are just not functioning well. That's metabolic. So right. that's number 2.
And we're talking about in Australia now, like in terms of you're ranking these things, a cardiac arrest or heart disease, metabolic disease, and the third one is going to be?
There's different ways to rank them, but like I'm talking more about the burden of disease. Right. Okay. So number 3 is musculoskeletal disease. I think this is something that is often overlooked.
I've never heard of that one. Well, what is that?
Musculoskeletal, your muscles and your bone.
Yeah.
How well is your physical body working? And for folks who want to really achieve longevity and to really achieve health span, so that's living your life in your 80s and 90s the way you're living in your 50s and 60s, right? I'm doing all the things that you want to do. One of the biggest blockers to that goal, to that reality, is usually musculoskeletal disease.
In other words, becoming frail.
Becoming frail. Frailty, right? We call it, if you have suboptimal muscle, we call that sarcopenia. So it's a medically defined condition now.
Is it a condition or is it a disease, sarcopenia? Like your muscles start to diminish. Is that a disease state or?
It's more of a condition. I mean, like, how do you separate a condition and a disease? So like, I think some folks would think a disease is an active process. An active process would be like if you had motor neuron disease, it's an active process where it's really like there's an active process that is diminishing your abilities.
Yeah.
Whereas sarcopenia is more so the gradual loss of function. But from my point of view, we really just want to look at the outcomes. Like we need to protect you from active processes, but we also need to protect you from normal time-based processes. The process is like quite similar and the outcome is quite similar, which is the outcome is very clear. We need to be goal-focused, which is strong bones as you age, strong muscles as you age, while taking into account the fact that it actually becomes harder to build muscle.
Because are you saying then, Stephen, that it's frailty, which being the end goal, but the musculoskeletal demise, whilst it's sort of inevitable as we age, you can slow down the inevitability.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Look, there is a natural decline.
Yeah.
So I'll give an example. When you're 30, the cost for you to build on 100 grams of muscle is going to be much lower than the cost of you trying to build it when you're 50.
What would the cost be?
The cost would be the effort and the amount of raw protein that you need. So basically, what is the, let's say all things accounted for, how much protein do you need to eat to build up 100 and work out to build up 100 grams of muscle versus when you're 30 versus you're 50. So that is a natural decline. But it's about understanding that. By the way, that's also different from person to person, right? So one key thing that people should always remember is no two people are the same. We have different genetics. We're all dealt a different hand at the start of life. And some people, you've probably met these people, right? They don't work out a lot, but they really put on muscle very easily.
Yeah.
And some folks, they're just at the gym like 6 days a week. Yeah, they're working really, really hard. They're doing all the right things, but something might be blocking them from success, right? So at Everlab, we try to find what those reversible things are, but some of it's also genetic. But that's also important to understand because people are different, right? So we have to play our hands differently if you want to win.
And what's that's 3. So what's the fourth one?
Fourth one's cancer.
Cancer,
I think that's a no-brainer. 1 in 2 people will get a significant cancer by the age of 80.
Whoa.
That number is also going down.
Wait,
right?
How do you mean? It's now 1 in 3 or it's becoming 1
that
point?
age is also going down.
Oh, right.
So like cancer's going up.
Right.
In fact, this is very alarming. More and more young people are getting cancer. So if you're age under 39, so if you're between the age, I think the age gap is the age group is 15 to 39. Solid organ tumors have gone up by 80%.
What?
In the past 30 years.
Whoa.
So these are very alarming statistics. So, I went through medical school 20 years ago. When I was in medical school, it was unheard of to have young folks get like bowel cancer. Now it's happens all the time.
I had a friend of mine's wife who's only 40, early 40s, had breast cancer and passed away.
Cancer is on the rise. Bowel cancer is now the deadliest cancer for people between the ages of 25 and 44.
No.
In Australia.
I always thought of it as an older person's cancer.
So these are all like, Mark, these are cultural assumptions that we make. And I see a lot of these and I hear a lot of these. These are cultural assumptions that we make. I've got a bunch of these, right? But one of those is cancer's an old person's problem. Well, I just told you the stats and I see it in practice.
Wow.
Also, cancer's a tricky one because, we can try our best to predict it, and we can to a much larger extent than people think. We can use genetics, we use family history, we use biomarkers. But the good thing about cancer is it does have a weakness, which is like early detection, but you want to make good decisions based on what your risk is. And we know that the risk is becoming higher for some reason. I think one day we'll look back at 2025 the way today we look back and think about when we used to smoke all the time and say, hey, like that increased cancer rates by 100, like across 100 different cancers. I think there are certain factors that are happening now, but it is no longer it is no longer an older person's problem.
And the fifth one, because I want to go through each one of those in a moment. What's your fifth?
The fifth one is neurodegenerative disease.
Of course.
Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Alzheimer's is projected to be, by I think 2040, the leading killer in Australia. Obviously, it depends how you define what you put on a death certificate as well. But if you think about the burden of disease and the burden of pain on our community with an aging population, it's a real concern.
Alzheimer's and I presume you're in neurodegenerative disease. You're including things like Parkinson's and everything
Parkinson's, motor neuron disease. Obviously, they're a little bit rarer, but a vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementias, Lewy body dementias, all under that same umbrella. But Alzheimer's by far.
So we've got these the five I used to think of the 4 horsemen, the 5 horsemen now, and the one that has never really been mentioned to me before is skeletal muscular.
That's right, muscles and bones.
Muscles and bones.
But this is not a foreign thing to people, though.
No.
Right? Osteoporosis.
Yeah, totally.
Osteoporosis.
Well, a number of people break their hips and fall over, and because they haven't got enough muscle to carry them is quite incredible. I've got friends, older friends, who that's happened to. And they face plant and they could have got brain damage. They could have died.
Yeah.
They trip over something and their their fast twitch ability is not there, and they can't correct.
Exactly.
And largely sometimes it's something to do with not the negligence, but they're not paying attention either because they're older. They're sort of walking and they trip over something that you or I might see, or you would definitely see. But their ability to correct the position and not land flat on their face and perhaps crack their head open is diminished, and because then
that's a functional deficit.
Deficit.
Is that a disease? Is that a condition? Well, it's hard to categorize it, but without a doubt, it's a functional deterioration. So why don't they have that reaction time? Why don't they have that proprioception to feel the position of their joints? Why don't they have the strength? Why don't they have the reaction time to put their arms out? And some of these cases, the death certificate might say like bleed in the brain or traumatic brain injury. But if you think, why did this person even fall over? Right? It's often weakness. It's musculoskeletal.